Chapter 7. Despite the darkness, Snow White was no longer scared. She was surrounded by woodland creatures, all of whom seemed intent on helping her. She remembered her father talking about the magic of the woods, about animals that seemed human. Perhaps these were such creatures. They walked on all sides of her, occasionally brushing against her leg or hand, as if to say, "We're here. Don't worry." And she found that she didn't. Instead, she gazed around the woods curiously. The sky was brightening with the approaching dawn, the soft light illuminating the path at her feet. The ground was tamped down, as if the path had frequent use. But by whom? Snow White wondered. The animals? Or something? Or someone else? Her thoughts drifted to the young man she had saved. The thief had said he lived in the forest, hadn't he? Did he walk this path? Was he nearby? Perhaps he could help her. He certainly didn't seem to care for the queen. She was shaken from her reverie by the gentle nudge of one of the deer. Looking up, she saw that they had entered a clearing, and there, in the middle, was a cottage. The dawn light turned into a beautiful warm red, making it appear welcoming. Snow White almost clapped her hands in glee. Finally! Perhaps whoever lived there would allow her to rest for a bit. Several of the animals pushed past her and nudged the door open. Snow White didn't hesitate. Eager for warmth and a place to sit, she entered the cottage. She had to duck to go through the rather low door. When she stepped inside, closing the door behind her, she took a quick breath. The space looked like a typical cottage, only miniature. And messy. Very, very messy. Dishes were piled high in the sink, cobwebs hung from the rafters, and several of the chairs around the low table were knocked over. Everything, from the cabinets to the chairs to the sink, appeared to have been carved by hand from wood. Images of flowers and vines painted on the walls ran up and onto the ceiling. It almost felt like being in an indoor garden. "Hello?" Snow White called out tentatively. "Is there anybody here?" She was met with silence, but then a sudden gust of wind blasted the front door open. The sound startled Snow White, and without waiting for an answer, she rushed over, slammed the door, and raced up the stairs. Her heart was pounding as she flung herself into the attic space. Light from a window caught on the dust motes Snow White's frantic entrance had kicked up. Like the room below, this one was messy and clearly heavily used. The walls slanted down on either side, and rough wood floors covered the entire area. The ceiling was thatched, and in the middle of the space stood 7 small beds, each with a different name written on the footboard. Walking to the nearest one, Snow White heard the wind tapping at the windows and shivered. She had had a long night, a long day too. She was tired and cold. She just needed a quick rest, and then she would figure out what to do. She lowered herself into the bed and pulled the covers over her head. Then, clutching her locket at her hand, she quickly fell asleep. Doc was tired. He and his friends had left the cottage before dawn to get to the caves and begin their work. For hours they had dug and collected gems from the mine. The beautiful gems were easy to find for them. They simply put a hand on the rocky surface and the gems began to glow, calling to the miners to free them. So that was what they did, day after day, week after week. They loved their work, though the constant time together made them more family than friends, and that meant that on occasion they argued and teased each other. Some of them, like Happy, didn't mind the teasing. He really was happy most of all. Others, like Grumpy, got annoyed quickly and spent as much time complaining as they did digging. But before the most part, they were a happy group who went to work each day singing and went home each evening still singing. Now, as Doc led the others back to the cottage, he wondered what they would make for dinner. and if Sleepy would make it through the door before falling asleep for the night, he was fairly certain Sneezy would have a sneezing fit as soon as they got into the clearing, and Grumpy would say something that made Bashful blush and Dopey look confused, and Happy would just keep singing and smiling. Doc smiled himself. Yes, he was tired, but he loved this little group and the routine of their life. It was simple. Nothing changed, nothing happened, and he liked it quite fine. Change had never been his strong suit. They arrived at the cottage, and their song ended as Doc pushed open the door. One by one, they filed in, yawning and tossing their shoes and jackets in random spots. Doc lit a candle and handed it to Sleepy, who led the way, quite sleepily, up the stairs. Everyone was too tired that night to bother with dinner. One by one, they grabbed sleeping caps and replaced their dirty clothes with red one-piece pajamas hanging from hooks on the wall outside the room. Ready for bed, they headed toward their room. Apparently, they weren't going fast enough for Grumpy's taste, and he let out a grump. It's a... Sleepy stammered, pointing into the room. The others couldn't see what he was talking about, but he could tell them. Before he could tell them, he passed out, slumping into Happy's arms. Happy smiled. He did it again, he said. Doc nodded. Narcoleptic cataplexy, he observed. Sleepy had a tendency to fall asleep suddenly when he was worried. Doc had tried to work with him on the reaction, but clearly it wasn't helping. I thought he just... Achoo! Fell asleep when he was worried, Sneezy said. Worried about what? What's there to be worried about? Happy asked. Doc shrugged. He wasn't sure. But then everyone saw Dopey. He had walked past the sleeping Sleepy and entered the room. He was pointing at something. The others crowded in and followed his finger. They all gasped as they saw the sheets on one of the beds moving. The others stared at the bed. Then they looked at Sleepy. Then at Grumpy. Then finally, everyone turned to Doc. He sighed. He knew what they wanted him to do. Moving toward the bed. Yes. He reached out an arm. His fingers were just about to grab the sheet when suddenly the sheet stretched and a loud groan filled the room. Doc turned on his heel and headed out of the room. The others followed. But before Dopey could get out, Grumpy slammed the door, trapping Dopey inside with a ghost. Frantic, Dopey pulled at the door, trying to open it, but all he managed to do was rip the knob right off. He fell backward, scrambling on his feet as he neared the door, the bed, and the moving sheet. He inched back to the door and leaned against it so that his ear was next to the keyhole. How big is it? He heard one of them say. The others added advice to the mix, warning him not to look it in the eyes or touch it. Dopey sat silently, staring at the bed. Bashful was the one to ask the question that was on everyone's mind. Is it floating? The sheet had stopped moving, and no more sounds came from underneath it. On tiptoe, Dopey nervously approached the bed. He stopped, his fingers hovering over the sheet. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he gingerly pulled the sheet off the bed. Dopey's eyes widened as he took in the beautiful girl sleeping peacefully. Her dark hair lay across the pillow, framing her face. He thought she looked like an angel. He stepped closer, wanting a better look. And then the girl's eyes popped open, spotting Dopey, staring at her. She did what anyone would do if startled awake in such a manner. She screamed loudly. Dopey opened his mouth wide, but no sound came out. He never made a sound, but it was easy to see he would be screaming if he could. A girl screamed again. Dopey silently followed suit. Outside, the miners, not sure what was going on, but scared nonetheless, began to scream too. Soon the entire cottage was filled with the shrieks of 6 miners and a girl. Dopey took off, ducking into the shadows of the eaves. The girl's gaze followed him, and he watched with a combination of curiosity and fear as she stood up and began to move toward him. He edged along the walls, trying to keep his distance from her, but she was bigger than he was, and soon enough she caught up to him. Crouching down, she looked at him. He had closed his eyes, but now opened one cautiously. The girl was gazing at him kindly. He opened the other eye. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice sweet and melodic. "It's all right." Dopey shook his head. She sounded sincere, and she was looking at him with such wide eyes. Slowly, he stepped closer. The girl smiled and gently touched a finger to his cheek. "I only wanted to meet you," she said. "Mommy." "Yes, sweetie?" "Okay." "What's your name?" Dopey blushed from the tips of his ears to his toes. Then, before he could stop himself, he did a little kick. "Yes?" "You can go get it."
I'm talking to my side room.
"Okay."
Can you go get my side room?
"Okay, let me finish up here." It was what he did when he was pleased with something. And right then he was quite pleased to have been the first to meet their guests.
Mommy?
"Don't you speak?" "Yes."
Why do you have that right there?
"So I could keep the camera up." "Don't you speak?" she asked softly. Just then the door shook and burst open, and the 6 others fell into the room. They had grabbed their pickaxes and were brandishing them above their heads. It would have been a lot scarier if they hadn't also been wearing their red sleeping caps. "Wait, please," the girl said as she backed up. Her voice started to tremble, and Dopey thought he saw a tear in her eye. "I didn't mean any harm." As she approached, the 7 of them stared at her. Then they all began to talk. "Yes?"
I want you to put Sonic on.
"Okay," one after another. "Why," Doc began. "It's a human," Bashful said, surprisingly unbashful for once. The girl looked back and forth between them all. Then she smiled. "Well, yes," she said. "What did you think I was?" Dopey smiled. If he talked, he might have teased them for being scaredy cats. Instead, he let them explain, sort of. "Nothing," Sneezy said. At the same time, Grumpy crossed his arms and huffed, "Ghost." The girl let out a laugh, and just like that, the tension lifted. Moving toward the 7 of them surrounded her. "Yes?"
I can't hear it.
Moving forward, the 7 of them surrounded her, throwing questions at her and right. "Where did you come from? Do you feel well? Are you hungry?" As they fell over one another to talk to the girl, Dopey saw that Grumpy was standing back, frowning. "Why is everyone being so cordial?" he finally asked. "The only human things who come into the forest anymore are bandits who claim to fight in the king's name." He narrowed his eyes and stuck out his chin at the girl. "What?" she asked, her eyes widening in surprise. "You're in trouble with the law, aren't you?" Grumpy continued as he walked closer toward their guest.
I'll sit next to you.
"Okay." To Dopey's surprise, the question seemed to upset the girl. She glanced around nervously and took a few steps toward the door. "I'd better go," she said. "Told ya," Grumpy said. Wait. Hold on," Doc interrupted. "Let her leave," Grumpy said, always eager to have the last word.
Mommy, I'm going to read with you.
"Okay." Dopey and Doc shot their friend a look. That wasn't how they treated a guest.
Silent free.
Even human ones. And sending her away now was wrong. "At least tell us who you are," Sleepy said, yawning loudly. Yeah, Happy agreed as he nodded enthusiastically. The girl looked at each of the 7. She appeared to be trying to decide if she could trust them. Her gaze lingered on Grumpy before returning to Dopey. He smiled encouragingly. She took a deep breath. "My name is Snow White," she said, and then she turned and moved toward the door. The others stared, their mouths hanging open. Snow White? The princess? No one had heard from or seen her in years, not since her father... "Snow White?" questioned Dot. "The princess?" asked Bashful, as Grumpy began to pace around the small room. Dopey had to admit Grumpy wasn't wrong to be acting nervous. Humans rarely came to the forest, and lately when they had, it hadn't been for any good reason. At one time, the 7 of them and other magical creatures had welcomed humans with open arms. But that was before. Now here was a human, the princess no less. The princess who lived in the castle. And since the queen had arrived, not one good thing had come out of the place. "I say it's a trap," Grumpy said. "But she needs our help," Doc said. Dopey nodded in agreement. He had seen the flash of fear in Snow White's eyes. She was scared and alone. Behind them, they heard footsteps on the stairs. They turning, they saw the object of their conversation was no longer there. Snow White was leaving.